Welcome to the Driving the World podcast series. I'm your host, Cully Holland. Today we have Jason Hahn, a product engineer from our industrial gearing division, and we'll be discussing sizing and selecting our industrial gearing product. Hey, Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back on and sitting down with us. Today we're going to talk about kind of a broad topic that might seem a little simple at first, but I think it's going to be pretty interesting. We're just going to talk about the selection and sizing of industrial gearing products. So why don't we just dive in from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, like with everything SCW does, we sell and we deliver torque. So figuring out how much torque you need is really the most important first step in selecting a gearbox for any of our product lines. To do that, the most important things to have are going to be motor power, motor speed, and then speed of the application. How fast does the customer want this gearbox turning at the output? Those three pieces get you the amount of torque that's required, and then you can start your selection process from there.
All right. So, pretty simple, but we kind of have to have that, don't we? We're just going to check those check boxes: motor horsepower, input and output speeds. Now, a lot of people might be like, hey, I can get a selection from that. But I'm assuming there's a little bit more that goes into it, especially for our industrial gearing products. So, why don't we talk about some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Industrial gearing products go into really nasty, dirty, heavy industry applications. There's a lot of other considerations to be made when you're selecting a gearbox. The first thing really would be service factor. You know, how beefy does this thing need to be, and that really comes down to where is this unit going to be used, what application is it going into. So finding out what the application in the industry is can really tell you almost everything else you need to know, or lead into other questions that we know we need to talk to the customer about in order to really make sure that this gearbox suits their needs.
Right. Okay. So, the application, we got our horsepower, we got our speed. Now we're going to start talking about the application, some service factors. So, we're getting down the sizing pretty well. I'm guessing the application might lead us, you said we are going to have some other questions, to possibly some add ons or some specialized components to make sure it lives longer in that application. What are some of those things that could play into the sizing or selection?
Well, for a lot of that, it comes down to what is the gearbox going to be doing. So, for example, if we know it's going to be a mixer, we have some special bearing designs that we can offer for mixers, and we know that there's going to be some radial and axial loads on the gearbox. It's kind of a special case. So we need to know, well, how much external loading is this going to have, and what can we do to modify the gearbox to make it support this application. Other situations where you might have shock loading, like in a rock crusher, or um, just various, or maybe a cement plant where it's really dirty, and there's going to be cement dust everywhere, and you're going to have a 3-inch layer of cement on the gearbox. That's going to affect the thermal rating. So then what do I need to do as far as cooling goes? Is a simple fan okay, or do we need to go a little bit more extreme with an oil air cooler? Is it, maybe it's next to a kiln, and it's really, really hot, so then you really need a lot extra cooling. Heating can be a concern as well if it's going into an environment that's really cold. So in addition to knowing the application, it's important to also know, where is this gearbox physically going? Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? Is it going into Canada? Is it going to Arizona? What's the environment going to be like, and how harsh is it going to be as far as temperature extremes go? Because we have a lot of accessories that we can offer to either heat the oil or cool the gearbox down.
So it sounds like if our SCW employees are out there talking about industrial gearing or any gear motors and they're asking for the application, we're not just being nosy. It actually gives us a lot of information, and it's going to lead us down the path of not just what the application is, but how the application is acting on our gear motor or gearbox to make sure that we're giving them the components they need to live up to it. So we're looking at this. You're saying, where is it located? Is there ever a time where the physical location or space requirements play a role in selecting maybe not just a gearbox, but a style of gearbox?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our the great thing about our IG gearboxes is that we have what we call universal housing, so it can really be mounted in almost any orientation. Um, that stuff's important to know, because you might not have a lot of, like, say, on a conveyor, you may not be able to stick the gearbox out the backside of the conveyor, or certain situations you might need to have the motor straight up in the air because there's not enough room on the ground to put the gearbox horizontally. Those are all important things to know, because and also sometimes it can come down to what product are we going to select? Are we going to choose a planetary, which is a little bit more compact versus an X series because of a spatial requirement? And those are all things that we want to take into consideration as well.
Very good. So, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about the quote unquote basics here: motor horsepower, motor speed, output speed, and at the end of the day, where and what. With those five things, it sounds like we're going to dive down and get a few more questions and we can get a lot of the information we need. Is there anything else that our customers should be looking out for when it comes to sizing or selecting industrial gearing, or will those five things just about sum it up?
I think that sums it up pretty well. And I think it's also important to note that we've talked a lot about a lot of stuff here, and there's a lot of considerations to be made. But I also don't want that to scare people because we have experts on the inside. We have a lot of support. We've got application engineers. So if you can give us that information, then we know what questions to ask next, and we can kind of walk you through the process on what do we really need to get from you to be able to do this for you so that you don't need to be an expert on our product because we're the experts.
I mean, that sounds awesome to me. A little bit of good information, probably some good pictures, and just give us a call and we'll get you squared away.
Yeah, that's about it.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.